Last night, Biden took to the television airwaves to give a national address in which he used and abused, is the best way I can say it, the Israeli people. He used the attack on Israel to make the case to continue to fund Ukraine. He spent most of that speech last night talking about how important it is to stop Putin and to fund Ukraine. Ukraine has already gotten $113 billion of our dollars. Now, in this $105 billion request for war aid, $60 billion more for Ukraine. And oh, by the way, the country that just was attacked by terrorists, Israel, gets $14 billion for military and security assistance. $10 billion for humanitarian assistance, which is part of what they're going to send to Hamas. $14 billion for U.S. border security. Oh, that. $7 billion for security aid to Taiwan. So that's what we heard last night from the traitor-in-chief. And I'm sorry, I feel it is almost treasonous for him to do what he is doing. Now let's bring in Ryan Mauro. As promised, Ryan Mauro is, again, one of the foremost Middle East experts. He's working with the Capital Research Center now, and he joins us on AM 1420, The Answer. Ryan, good to have you back. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well. Thanks so much for having me.
Always a pleasure. Thank you, Ryan. So last time we spoke, we were just kind of, this was last Wednesday, so we were, 3-4 days removed from the October 7th attack, and now we've had a little bit more time go by. News this morning is Israel is presenting war on 3 fronts. They may be fighting war from the West Bank, from from Lebanon by way of Hezbollah, and of course going into Gaza as well. That's the latest that we have. Tell me what America's support system for Israel should look like, Ryan Mauro.
Well, I think it should look similar to what it is now, along with a threat to, or especially the Iranian-backed militias in Iraq that are attacking us. Let them know that we will retaliate, that we don't put up with that. The vast majority of Iranian-sponsored attacks on U.S. troops are not responded to, and that sends a really bad message. Now, whether we want to actually get involved in if there's a broader regional conflict or not, some people will say yes, some will say no. I think the message that needs to be sent is that, at the very least, we might, in order to deter Hezbollah, because they have the 130,000 rockets that are aimed at Israel. The estimates are that they could kill something like 40,000 Israelis in a day. And we've got to do whatever we can in order to deter them from hitting that button.
When you say it should be largely, our response and our support should be largely what it is now, I want to challenge that or follow up on that a little bit. I don't get the sense that we have, quote unquote, unequivocal support for Israel. We're supposed to. They're our allies. The Iranian proxies in Hamas and Hezbollah are our enemies. There should be no equivocation whatsoever. And yet I'm not getting that sense, especially when Biden last night, as part of his speech, told Israel to be proportional in their response. He didn't use that word. He said, don't be consumed by your rage. We were consumed by our rage after 9/11, and then we made mistakes. I think he's coding a message to Bibi Netanyahu and others not to go all in, to do everything it takes to destroy Hamas in Gaza. Because don't be consumed by your rage. And I think he's looking out for the Palestinian people because of the Palestinian caucus that he represents as a Democrat president.
I think there's truth to that he's looking out for the Palestinian people. But in fairness, I've kind of said the same thing that he said, where I said, one of Israel's best weapons is their moral superiority, and it would be a mistake to jeopardize that, because there were some statements coming out of Israel that I thought were a little bit over the top. Now, in terms of conduct, they've been incredibly restrained. I mean, they've done, the world has been waiting for that moment to pounce on Israel, like we saw with the so-called bombing of that hospital. Mm-hmm. But I have urged, publicly saying, look, Israel needs to maintain that moral superiority by, kind of restraining themselves to whatever degree possible while still achieving their military objectives.
Give me an example of what you mean, Ryan Mauro, when you say that some of the statements coming from Israel have been over the top.
I believe it was the Israeli president, or it was another senior official, who basically said there's no such thing as a civilian casualty because Hamas was elected by the people in Gaza. and the people in Gaza have not overthrown Hamas. And there have been some statements by IDF spokespeople that sounded basically as if they're going to go in and not really care about civilian casualties. And I'm all for some of that bluster, and I think that it's good to sound tough like that. But I also know how the other side can take that and how they weaponize it. And I don't want to give them that weapon.
That's tough because I don't want to give them any more weapons either, but I just happen to believe they don't need any more. They are already raised. The Palestinians are raising their children to hate Jews. They're raising their children to believe that Israel should not exist, that's their land. And as they go from child to adolescent to adult, they are ready to fight to make that happen. So while I agree with you and understand that, well, hey, maybe the citizenry, the civilians of Gaza can't overthrow Hamas like they're talking about, they are not innocent in terms of what their goals are as well. And moreover, if there is a loss of, a severe and significant amount of collateral damage in Gaza to the Palestinian civilians, again, I think that blood will be on the hands of Hamas, which hides behind them and continues to hide among them, knowing that if they get struck for the purposes of hitting Hamas and Hamas targets and collateral damage happens, it just fuels the propaganda war against Israel.
Sure, and you're accurately articulating the dilemma. I think that there's always going to be some calibration that takes place. Like if there's a nursery and it's full of young kids, and there's an ammo stockpile there, Israel may decide, well, it's not worth going after that ammo stockpile and then killing a bunch of kids. Like those type of dilemmas are going to present themselves. And so there is always going to be that debate about whether striking a target.
And they have always sided. They have always sided against that, right? I mean, virtually every time, because Hamas does this. They do. They don't care if they kill their kids because they say, well, they're going to be martyred anyway. If the kids die because they strike the ammo stockpile, then good for the kids. They're going to Allah, and good for us because we get to stack their bodies up and take pictures and say, look what Israel did. But Israel has been very, very cautious and has always decided against those kinds of strikes. But now, after the worst attack on Jews and on Israel since, obviously, the Holocaust, as everybody has talked about, now it's a game changer. Now, can they afford, if I'm speaking for Israel, can we afford to be as cautious and as concerned and caring about civilian casualties as we have been in the past, given that the game has changed now?
No, they definitely have to get more aggressive. For example, they've publicly said that they stopped doing what they called like the door knock or the roof knock, where they would send a little munition there in order to warn everyone, hey, we're going to come bomb a building, you better get out. And they're stopping that because what would happen is when they do that, everyone, including the Hamas personnel targets, evacuate the building. Well, they want to kill those Hamas members. They need to kill those Hamas members. And so they can't afford to give that warning as they have in the past. So there are going to be changes like that result in greater civilian casualties. But you're right. The ultimate burden for that is entirely on the part of Hamas and the other terrorist groups that are involved. And as for the indoctrination, just so people understand how severe it is, 57% of the adults in Gaza support Hamas. They have a favorable opinion or a somewhat favorable opinion. But then two other terrorist groups that do the same thing, Lion's Den and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, is supported by 3/4 of the adults.
And that's important to know because it was that third group you just mentioned, the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, that launched that rocket that landed in the parking lot next to the hospital and caused a lot of damage that they just decided to say killed 500 people, and it was an Israeli bomb. Which of course was never ever truthful. But that group it's important that you mentioned that the 75% of the Palestinian people support that organization. So again, when Israel leadership says there's no, I kind of made this point yesterday on my program. I didn't even know about that statement you told me today, but I said I think there is no further distinction between Palestinians in Gaza and Hamas anymore. I say Hamas is Palestinians, Palestinians is and are Hamas because of what you just described. I don't know that that's inaccurate.
Well, I might just be a stickler for being specific, but I mean, it still means that there's some Palestinian adults that don't support any of these groups. You still have that remaining 20%.
Right. And those people are the
25%,
ones,
yeah.
and those people are the ones that Israel is trying to say, we want to help you. We don't want to harm you. You need to get
Right.
out because here we come. But there's nowhere for them to go. And Ryan, you know, we're talking to Ryan Mauro. If you just turned us on, he is a researcher at the Capital Research Center, America's investigative think tank. He is a Middle East expert. Ryan, you know the mentality of the peoples of that region as well as anybody that I talk to. So tell me, why are the Arab states all surrounding Israel refusing to take in their fellow Arabs, to take in the Palestinian quote-unquote refugees? Egypt doesn't want them. Jordan doesn't want them. Syria doesn't want them. So they're all kind of stuck in Gaza. And that, of course, limits the ability of Israel to carry out their strikes against Hamas without there being that collateral damage. Why are Arab countries refusing to assist their fellow Palestinian/Arab/Muslim refugees?
There's a few reasons. The first most important reason is that they understand that that's a highly radicalized population. So now you have a very big issue in terms of security, especially for the Egyptians, because Egypt bans the Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist organization, and Hamas is the Palestinian wing of the Muslim Brotherhood. So they're a sworn enemy of Hamas, and so importing a population like that presents major security challenges. The second reason is because you then have to provide aid to those refugees. You don't just let them in, you have to basically take care of them. And then the third reason would be that they're not sure if those refugees would actually be able to return to Gaza. They're worried that they take in the refugees, and then because of the fighting or an Israeli occupation, whatever reason, they're not going to be able to go out, and so then they're stuck permanently taking care of those refugees.
So as it pertains to, once again, to the U.S., Biden, in addition to the numbers I gave that he outlined last night in his $105 billion request for war aid, he had also announced prior to that the $100 million in aid that is specifically being sent to Gaza for the civilians there. And he said it's only for the civilians there. Number one, there's no such thing as money going only to the civilians, because we know that Hamas takes everything that comes in. For crying out loud, water pipes used for, survival infrastructure were commandeered and repurposed as, to make missiles and launch systems and rockets. So any money that goes into Gaza is going into Hamas hands. And then the second part of that is, as Americans trying to be humanitarians, some are calling for Gazan refugees, Palestinian refugees, to be able to come to the United States and seek refuge here. Would that be something we should consider?
I would say no. Again, because of the same security dilemmas that we were talking about, I'm not convinced at all that we could vet them, especially with such a high percentage supporting Hamas. And when you support Hamas, that means that you believe in lying. That is part of their doctrine. And so it would be very easy for someone who doesn't have clear Hamas ties but is a Hamas supporter to try to come to the United States and just say, yeah, of course I don't support Hamas. And how would you find out that they're lying? It'd be very difficult. So I think it's just an impossible situation in terms of the vetting. As for the money, the $100 million, I mean, that money's totally being wasted. The only way, in theory, you could guarantee that money's getting to where it should be, to civilians that actually need it, would be as if an international organization under the advisement of the United States, like, physically did it themselves. And I don't know how that would even be possible in a situation like that. Who's going to send in personnel? So at some point, you send in that humanitarian aid, you're going to have to hand it over to an entity that is supposedly neutral, but is in all likelihood controlled by Hamas. And Biden basically kind of admitted that might happen in his speech. He said, if it gets diverted or stolen by Hamas, there'll be consequences or something to that effect. And to me, if you know that's such a strong likelihood, money is limited. Why would you send that money and spend it in that way? It's kind of bizarre to me.
It is to me as well. We're talking to Ryan Mauro, Middle East expert with the Capital Research Center. So I'm sitting here looking at a situation in which Gazan civilians, the ones that people are concerned about, the small percentage of them that don't support terrorist groups like Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and they can't go to Egypt. They can't go to Jordan for all the reasons you just described. We sure as hell cannot bring them here because it would just be inviting the enemy into your homes and into your neighborhoods to carry out horrific attacks. And as you say, the Islamic belief in taqiyya, right? That's the word, isn't it? Taqiyya or taqiyya,
Yep.
which is
That's one of them. Yep.
they're compelled by Islamic law to lie to advance their goal of taking out infidels and more. So if they can't get out of Gaza because no one will take them, including us, what advice do you have for the Israelis? They have to be able to go in there and make sure that the next October 7th is prevented by wiping out Hamas root and branch, and they know they're going to have civilian casualties. So Ryan, you expressed a little bit of concern about their, over-the-top statements that were coming in, and we don't care what happens. But how would you advise them to proceed now? Apparently, they're still marshaling at the border and ready to go in, some 300,000 strong.
It's hard to give them any advice because it seems so obvious what they need to do, which is doing a ground campaign of reoccupation of the Gaza Strip for some period of time, and then hopefully somehow they find a Palestinian civil administration that they can partner with among that 20-25% of the population that doesn't support the terrorist organizations, so that they're not taking care of day-to-day life indefinitely. But what the next stage is for Gaza after Israel goes in, I don't think anyone's really sure. In theory, the best you can do is either a direct Israeli occupation or, like I said, setting up a new Palestinian administration that is somewhat of a puppet of the Israelis and works with them, kind of like how the U.S. had the Iraqi Governing Council after we overthrew Saddam.
Ryan Mauro, one of the foremost experts in Middle East policy and history that I know. He's with the Capital Research Center. Ryan, thank you for coming on. We're going to talk to you again and again and again as this plays out. We're going to talk about the folly of two-state solutions. We're going to talk about Iran's response and even China weighing in on this, telling Israel what they should do here. So there's a lot of repercussions still to be felt from this horrific attack of October 7th. And Ryan, thank you for giving us your expertise.
Thank you.